Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you want a masterclass in, well, how regional diplomacy can really shake up internal politics, you are definitely in the right place today. We're opening up a file that centers on a really pivotal, maybe even surprising moment. It's the proposed Donald Trump peace plan for Gaza, dated around October 2025. Okay, let's unpack this.
That's right. And our source material for this dive, it's mainly drawn from quite an in-depth discussion with Hamid Azimi, a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the NCRI.
Right.
So our mission is really to analyze the huge ripple effects of this proposed peace plan. The key question we need to get into is why peace in the region is seen as this undeniable strategic, well, a lose-lose for the Iranian regime.
And the core idea we're diving into is pretty simple, but also profound.
Yeah.
The Iranian regime sees regional peace not just as like an inconvenience, but as a genuine existential threat.
Exactly.
This whole situation is viewed as a disaster they actively tried to prevent. The system we're talking about, the regime's sort of operating system, is the Vilayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurist.
And what's fascinating here, according to the source's analysis, is this fundamental idea that this Vilayat al-Faqih system, well, it's been the primary driver of instability, terrorism, war, you name it, in the Middle East for decades.
It meets conflict.
It seems to rely on external conflict for its own internal justification.
Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to the stated cause of the recent war. And here's where it gets really interesting, according to the source. The narrative suggests a direct line from internal weakness to external aggression. The regime felt existentially threatened by those massive massa protests back in September 2022.
Right, a huge internal challenge.
So they needed a diversion, a big one. The claim is they instigated the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel specifically to stir up regional chaos, to take the pressure off themselves.
And that narrative, it's backed up by a very specific detail cited in the sources. A directive apparently from Supreme Leader Khamenei himself back in April 2023. That's Ordobahesh 1402 in the Persian calendar.
Okay. And what did it say?
Khamenei apparently told his resistance front to focus specifically on strengthening militant groups inside Palestine. The source argues this was basically laying the groundwork for a regional flare-up designed explicitly to pull focus away from the streets of Tehran.
But the regime, it seems, made a huge miscalculation here. Khamenei was betting on his usual playbook, right? A sort of hit-and-run strategy.
That seems to be the idea. He expected a short war, maybe a few days, a couple of weeks max, but it just completely blew up the regional balance in the worst way possible for Tehran.
And those dates you mentioned, October and December 2024, they seem incredibly close together. That sounds less like a gradual shift and more like, I don't know, a domino effect, a collapse.
It was exactly that. The source points to massive, just irreplaceable strategic losses. It basically dissolved the regime's whole concept of strategic depth.
How so?
Well, first, Hassan Nasrallah was eliminated in October 2024, a huge blow in Lebanon.
Right, Hezbollah's leader.
Then, just 2 months later, December 2024, Bashar al-Assad flees Syria.
Wow. Okay, so connect this for us. How does losing two major allies, potentially thousands of miles away, directly hit the regime's control back home in Iran?
Well, it hits everything. Logistics, ideology, money. Losing Nasrallah really hampered the IRGC's main proxy network in Lebanon.
Okay.
But Assad fleeing Syria, that was even worse. It instantly cut off the mainland route for weapons for support into the whole Levant region.
The land bridge.
Exactly. It forced the regime's own fighters, the ones they call defenders of the shrine, they had to flee Syria and actually return to Iran.
So they're coming home.
Yeah. These weren't just political setbacks. They were real physical, material blows to the regime's ability to project power outwards. Their forward bases were exposed. Their proxies were demoralized.
Okay, so that deep instability in Tehran, that was the context for this big diplomatic push. What was the mechanism proposed to actually stabilize things? That gets us to the Trump peace plan. And the sources, they start by drawing a really critical line, arguing the fight is Israel versus Hamas, not Israel versus Palestine.
Exactly. The source really stresses that the legitimate Palestinian entity is seen as the Palestinian Authority, the PA, led by Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah.
And why is that distinction so important here?
It's crucial because the PA, they supported an immediate ceasefire. They endorsed this peace process and actively tried to distance themselves from the war Hamas started. So the whole diplomatic effort is built on stabilizing things under the PA's legitimacy.
Got it. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of this 20-point peace plan. The sources say the focus is immediate stability, right? Not trying to solve everything long-term right away.
Precisely. It's about immediate operational stability. Neutralizing Hamas's infrastructure is key.
Okay, so phase one.
Phase one is all about the immediate needs. A guaranteed ceasefire, hostages released within 72 hours, a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces, and massive humanitarian aid pouring in.
Right, urgent stuff.
But the real strategic hammer comes next: disarmament and governance.
Okay, disarmament. That sounds critical. What does it involve?
It calls for the complete demilitarization of Hamas infrastructure. We're talking tunnels, command centers, weapons, all of it. And alongside that, setting up a temporary international stabilization force.
Who would be in that force?
It would be backed by Arab and European countries. Its job is an occupation, but preventing a Hamas comeback, providing security, and training a new Palestinian police force.
Okay.
But here's the part that really targets the power vacuum: transitional governance. This would be led by a committee of Palestinian technocrats. Experts, basically.
Under whose supervision?
Overseen by an international body. The source calls it the Board of Peace.
And potential leaders mentioned.
The source throws out some big names, potentially Donald Trump himself, or maybe figures like Tony Blair. But the end goal is clear: gradually hand over governance to the existing Palestinian Authority structure under Abbas.
So effectively freezing Hamas out of political power permanently.
That's the clear objective, though the sources are careful to point out there are still, fuzzy areas, ambiguities.
Like what?
Things like the exact details of the prisoner release, how you actually verify Hamas is disarmed, and what the precise legal powers of this international board would be. Those things still need heavy negotiation.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, shifting focus a bit. We need to look at the pressures that actually drove this diplomacy forward so fast. You mentioned the political cost of the war earlier. Where did that pressure really come from?
It was kind of a perfect storm, really. A mix of domestic and global forces. Inside Israel, you had massive protests led by the hostage families, plus general strikes. That raised the internal political heat immensely.
And global.
Globally, the pressure was just unprecedented. Huge protests in Europe, in the U.S., and particularly on U.S. university campuses. All that significantly cranked up the international diplomatic temperature.
And we saw concrete examples of that pressure hitting policy, didn't we?
Absolutely. Like the U.S. decision back in May 2024 to pause some heavy arms shipments to Israel. That was over concerns about Rafah, a very public signal.
A clear message.
And all that diplomatic pressure, it forced the UN Security Council's hand. They passed resolutions calling for an immediate ceasefire back in March 2024.
Right.
And then later, in May 2024, they approved a more comprehensive three-phase ceasefire plan. All this political movement was a direct result of the climbing global cost of letting the conflict drag on.
Which raises the big question about the classic long-term goal, the two-state solution. The source mentions that in September 2025, 142 countries approved this New York Declaration roadmap for two states, which the U.S. actually opposed. So where does the Trump plan fit with that framework?
Right. Well, the source is pretty clear on this. The Trump plan is laser-focused on the immediate stuff. Stability, operational steps, getting the PA back in charge in Gaza, neutralizing Hamas. It's not explicitly aiming for the two-state solution right now.
So first things first.
Exactly. The source even quotes a major figure saying the two-state solution is currently, and I quote, not on the table. The priority is security first, political settlement down the road.
Okay, so let's bring it back to Tehran, to the Vilayat Faqih system.
Yeah.
This peace plan is designed for stability, but for Tehran, stability is apparently poison.
Right.
Why did Khamenei allegedly call this whole process satanic and malicious? Why does peace itself equal internal weakness for them?
This really gets to the core mechanic of the regime's survival strategy. It's deeply ingrained. Ever since the Iran-Iraq war, that brutal conflict, the regime has basically used external conflict, or just the constant threat of it, to manage internal dissent.
How does that work?
It channels anger outwards. It justifies massive internal oppression. External conflict provides the the ideological cover, the financial fuel, the potential and energy, as the source puts it, for their domestic repressive forces like the Basij and the IRGC.
Right, let's just quickly define those for listeners. The IRGC is the regime's elite military, economic, political powerhouse. The Basij are the huge volunteer paramilitary force, the ones often seen suppressing street protests.
Exactly. So when the regime's external pillars, people like Nasrallah, Assad, and now a functional Hamas, are suddenly gone or severely weakened, the whole justification for the Basij and IRGC being on a sort of internal wartime footing, it starts to crumble.
The excuse disappears.
Right. If you can't point to a massive external threat breathing down your neck, then your domestic security forces, they become demoralized and weaker, as the source says.
And there's an economic link, too, right, between spending money abroad and stability at home.
Yeah.
It sounds like a huge claim.
The source makes a strong case that the regime simply cannot afford peace. They can't address the severe domestic problems, the economic crisis, the power shortages, water shortages, because they have to pour billions overseas to maintain that external strategic depth.
Because that spending props up internal control.
That spending, financing foreign proxies, it's seen as absolutely vital for internal suppression. So when that external structure gets dismantled, the IRGC's cash flow for foreign ops gets choked off, and its image, its strength, the source calls it a paper tiger, gets exposed.
And the sources link this directly to actions inside Iran.
Yes, they cite the disruption of this external structure as the reason for the regime's desperate spike in savage executions.
How many are we talking about?
The numbers cited are stark. 200 executions in September 2025 alone, 120 in the first 9 months of that year. Many targeted people accused of supporting the organized opposition.
Oh.
This is presented as a symptom of just overwhelming internal weakness, a direct result of the foreign policy disasters.
It's like the regime is flailing, using raw terror at home to make up for failures abroad.
That's precisely the view presented in the source material, yes.
Okay, so now let's look at how the Iranian opposition itself views this sudden push for peace. The source material presents two quite different, contrasting viewpoints here.
That's right. First, you have the organized resistance, specifically the NCRI and the leadership associated with Pahlavi. They apparently immediately supported the peace process.
Why?
They see it as unequivocally good for the Iranian people and, critically, a major blow to the regime's power base. This isn't new for them. They apparently held the same view back during the 1993 Oslo Accords.
So consistency there.
Yes. From their perspective, the regime in Tehran is the #1, the first-degree loser of any real comprehensive peace deal in the region.
Okay, now let's contrast that with the analysis in the source regarding other opposition figures, specifically Reza Pahlavi. The NCRI analysis seems highly critical of his position.
It is, yes. The analysis claims that Pahlavi's camp, or his supporters, struggle to actually be happy about this peace. They argue that his strategy allegedly hinges on foreign intervention.
Intervention by whom?
Specifically, U.S. or Israeli conflict with the IRGC. The idea presented is that such a conflict would somehow pave the way for a faction within the IRGC to potentially install Pahlavi as monarch.
Okay, that's quite a theory.
It is. And therefore, the argument goes, regional peace completely undermines the need for the kind of foreign intervention his strategy supposedly relies on.
And there's another criticism mentioned about his stance on international pressure.
Yes, the NCRI critique also targets his position on sanctions. He's accused of essentially echoing the regime's own propaganda, saying that sanction mechanisms like the UN snapback actually hurt the Iranian people.
And why is that a point of contention?
Well, it's a key split. The NCRI argues this kind of talk weakens the unified opposition call to activate those very sanctions. They insist the snapback mechanism cuts off the regime's funding for repression for the IRGC's activities, not the people's food and medicine. That's their argument.
Let's bring this all together.
Yeah.
The sources strongly suggest that peace externally dramatically ramps up internal instability for the Iranian regime. It increases pressure on their core power structure, the IRGC system, mainly because that external strategic depth buffer is just gone.
Right. Which leads to a pretty important final question for you, the listener, to think about. The organized resistance, the NCRI, strongly supports activating the snapback mechanism, those powerful UN sanctions designed to cut off the regime's military and arms funding.
Targeting the repression machine.
Exactly. So consider this. How might achieving peace in Gaza, which removes Tehran's main external distraction, actually make the international community more unified, maybe more willing to impose those severe economic consequences on Tehran?
Could peace elsewhere, actually speed up the regime's strategic decline that the war already started.
That's the provocative thought to leave you with. Could peace in one area accelerate the pressure for change in another?
A really compelling thought, and a crucial link between regional diplomacy and the internal dynamics shaking Tehran. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into this very complex situation. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring these forces driving regional peace and how they might be shaking the very foundations of the Vilayat-e Faqih system.